does it really take to be a leader? Is it all about mindset? Is it about your health? Is it about the way you live your life to be an example to others? Today's featured expert is a vegan leader who reveals his system and process of thinking in order to be a leader through the example of how we live. You're in for a treat, so stick around.
Are you ready to live the life you deserve? Do you want to feel vibrantly healthy and reach your optimal weight without dieting while being kind to animals and the planet? Then you're in the right place at the right time. Welcome to Plant-Based Eating for Health with your host, certified plant-based nutritionist, Kathleen Gage.
The knowledge on becoming healthy, fit, on transitioning to a vegan diet is all out there, but the application is what's missing now. And I think that's something that going over to our coaching programs, I always say to people, we live in the information age. We live in an overabundance of information, an overabundance of ways on how to do things, right? What we don't live enough with is actually applying and directing knowledge consistently in the context of our lives, right? Because knowledge isn't power. Knowledge is not power. Power is knowledge directed and applied consistently over time. That's the definition of power.
Absolutely.
Right? I think many of us can relate to having read hundreds of hours of nutrition articles, of fitness workouts, of going on YouTube, going on Facebook, getting all the free ebooks. This is great. This is good for awareness. This is good for building up that initial spark, right? But what that is useless for is actually an application, right? Because you can take the ebook. It's not going to do it's not going to make you lift the weights. It's not going to make you change your identity. What will do that is actually sitting with yourself, sitting in stillness, sitting in silence, examining yourself, examining your motivations. And I think that's something that makes, what we do here a little bit different, because we actually go to the core. We actually try to go to the cause and see what is actually driving you to create this transformation, not just because you want to be healthy, fit, lean, toned. This is good. But that's the superficial layer. That's at the beginning. That's the top layer. We want to peel back the onions. We want to go really deep. Like, for example, if we were to go with you to your deepest motivation, I'm sure it wasn't just going to be healthy or to lose weight or things like that. It's to be a positive example, to help people like your mother who are still out there, who are unaware, who need help, who need that inspiration. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And actually this morning when I was on my morning run, I couldn't run for a couple of months because a few months ago, it was actually just a little over 2 months ago, I broke my wrist and I had to have surgery, and it was a freak accident. It had nothing to do with bone structure or anything like that, or bone density. It was truly a freak accident. And as I was healing through the process, and I'm still healing, I go to physical therapy. The physical therapist made it very clear. I said, well, how long will it take me to heal? And he said, well, that's really up to you. He goes, I can teach you what to do. What you do with that is up to you. And, that really has stuck with me, because so often in life we think, okay, if we learn something, that's going to be the answer right there. Well, the answer is applying what we've learned. And so as I was running this morning, I was thinking about how I was anxious to get back to running, because running is something I do consistently, just like growing a business, just like being a good influence as a leader. We can, again, read all the books in the world. When I first started walking, I did power walking a few years ago. I went out and bought every book I could find on the subject, and I read it and read it and read it. And the key was I had to apply it. And so really that's the key of what you teach people. So how did you go from, because I looked at some of your pictures, you had a little bit of a pot belly there for a young man. And actually it was more than a little bit of a pot belly. You had a pretty big pot belly, and now you're toned and you're fit. What was your motivation to go from being a couch potato to, because I would assume that you were kind of a couch potato. You may have been active, but you were nowhere near as fit as you are today. What was your motivation for that?
That's a really good question. I think that probably like most of us, we've gone through these phases, like these up and downs, these great, we're at the top of the mountain. We're like, oh my God, I'm so fit. I'm strong. I'm healthy. I'm a living embodiment. And these other times where it's kind of like we're in the valley. We're like, whoa, definitely don't let me post anything on social media now. This is the wrong time. And I think for me, I've realized that one of the biggest things in my life has been moving from identity phase into example phase, right? Because a lot of us were told that, once you have a habit down, you got it, right? Like once you start going to the gym, like you got this. Or once you start hitting your nutrition goals, you got it. Or once you start going to bed on time, you got it. But the thing is, habits take 30 to 120 days to create, to do it until you get it right. A lifestyle takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months to form. That means you do it until you can't get it wrong. Notice the difference? First one is you do it until you get it right. Second one, a lifestyle is until you can't get it wrong. An identity takes up to 3+ years to create. 3+ years, that's when it's just who you are. And exampleship is now when you're a living embodiment. So I've had the identity of being an athlete for most of my life. I grew up playing soccer since I was 5. I was playing baseball. I was doing all the typical American sports. But underneath that, right? Underneath that identity, there was that secret struggle. There was that secret struggle with my self-esteem. I didn't actually truly believe in myself, right? Because I had a lot of limiting beliefs, put into my mind. They weren't my choice, but they were put into a lot of negative thought patterns. And I didn't realize that. So even though I had the identity, right, of being an athlete, of being active, of being somebody who runs, who lift weights, right? I wasn't a living embodiment, right? Which is why I would still have these dips. So I was doing the habits. I had the lifestyle. I even reckon I identified as an athlete, but I wasn't being a living example. That's why I could go periods of times where I would just like sink out of fitness, where I would look like a couch potato. I would look like somebody who isn't an example of it. And so going back to your question, I think the shift for me was realizing if I don't stand up for myself first, but also as a positive example for my family, community, for the people who I really love, then who's going to do it? Nobody else here is doing it. So who else is going to do it? And I think that was a shift, because when we move from identity to exampleship, you realize your life is no longer about you. Your life is no longer about you. Your life is about everybody who you touch.
I love what you're saying, because actually I have not had a drink in over 37 years. I actually had a real problem with drinking and drugs, and to the point that I ended up on the streets as a result of it. And it was a process to learn how to live without alcohol. I mean, it wasn't just a matter of making the decision. Every day I had to learn a new behavior. I had to get people who guided me. They're called sponsors. I had to work the 12 steps. I had to be willing to go the distance if I wanted to change my life. And the thing I know to be true, and it's the same thing with being a vegan, there are certain behaviors that I absolutely do not partake in. And as an alcoholic, I don't take that first drink. And I've had people say, well, after this long, don't you think you could have one drink? It's like, why would I even play with that? Why would I even test it? Because I know where my life ended up as a result of drugs and alcohol, and I know where it ended up as a result of giving up those things. It's the same with being a vegan. It's like I could no more consume animal and dairy products today than I could fly to the moon. It's like the thought of it just repulses me, because I know how that food is processed, and if you want to call it food. And I just don't want to do that to myself, to the animals, to the environment. So the behaviors, you have the period where you change a habit, then you have the period where you change your identity, and then you have that period, which is a lifelong process where every single day you make a decision what kind of life you want to live and what kind of influence you want to be to people. So as you look at your own life, and let's say that you're 30 years in the future, you're looking back, what's the legacy that you want to leave for people? And before you answer that, I want to remind people that I'm talking to Gabriel Zhanay, and we are doing a Facebook Live, and we're also recording this for the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I encourage you to tune in and to leave a review and leave a rating on Apple Podcast, on YouTube, on wherever you see this episode. So go ahead, Gabriel, and share with us what's the legacy that you want to leave.
And I think that something that you just said real quick about making this decision, I think this, it resonates with me so much. And I feel so moved when you mention this, because I think it's something that I feel like it's becoming very common, you know, to speak about like, oh, you know, you can get results like this, or like we'll have like a 90-day transformation, or like, you know, after a year, like your business will be amazing. I think for all these different areas of our life as human beings, I think that it really comes down to this, what you just said. And James Clear talks about this in his book, Atomic Habits, where he says, you know, it's first you decide who you want to be. And then you go out there and you go do the habits. You go out there and you go and embody those things, right? Because we always want to move in alignment with who we are, right? We actually want to be congruent. None of us want to be like this incongruent person who's like, oh my God, you know, I said I was going to go to the gym and then I didn't. I mean, that kind of feels pretty shitty, you know, after you do that for a couple of weeks and you're like, I don't want to go to the gym because that's out of alignment with me. I'm just not going to do it. Right. And I think that's something that I've reflected on, especially over this past month, is how much more we need positive examples, how much more we need living embodiments. We don't need, I mean, we don't need more people who may just talk the talk, but aren't walking the walk, right? And I think there's plenty of people like that. And I'm not making anyone wrong or good or anything. It's just neutral. It's just the way it is. But I think that if we really want the future generations, right, the actual human beings who are going to live here after us, then I think that the legacy that I think would be the most meaningful for me is actually creating a generation of leaders, right? Of positive examples of, I like to think of it as living heroes, right? Because I think it's something where, you know, we think of a hero and there's this kind of like this fantasy, like there's some far away, like in thousands of years ago, there used to be a hero or something like that. Or like in the future, right? There'll be a savior or something. No, right now you can be your hero for yourself, right? And by leading yourself, you actually enable yourself to lead others. Right? That's the definition of leadership. You have to lead yourself first, and then you can actually lead others. And that allows you to step into leadership, into heroship, which I love to think about.
So, Gabriel, you know, it's interesting because you said that it's living the example, and actually every action you take is about the example. And I once heard quite some time ago, what you do in private, you will be rewarded for in public. And I think it was Tony Robbins was the first person I heard that from. And another example of a phrase that sticks with me is how you do anything is how you do everything. And some people have this public persona, but then privately, they're not walking the talk. In the last year and a half, it's been pretty difficult for a lot of people because of the shutdowns, and they have been forced into ways of living that really are not serving their highest good. And yet for some of us, it's been okay. You know, I love to read. I love to walk near the river. I love to play with my dogs. I love to go on runs. So it's not been that difficult for me. If anything, I think I'm getting too used to it. And I need to kind of break out of that habit, because I sometimes would much rather be with my dogs than with people. I'll be real honest, but, you know, and I'm probably not the only one, but quite seriously, over the last year and a half, the suicide rate has gone up. The depression rate has increased. Obesity has become a big problem. And a lot of what we're seeing with the pandemic, a lot of the complications are a direct result of how people are either taking care of themselves or not taking care of themselves. And what can you recommend to people in order to really use this time to dig deep into who they are, to start taking care of themselves in a way that they don't become a victim? Because a lot of people, unfortunately, they are letting fear take over their life. And, you know, there's certain things that they can do to minimize that. But what's your recommendation?
You know, I think this is really great that you mentioned that, especially about this last year. And I think this is, I think there's a lot of insights here into human nature, because a lot of these things, like a lot of these patterns that we have, they don't come out of nowhere. Like we don't just we don't just go in isolation and then all of a sudden we have like all these terrible habits that came out of nowhere. Right. They had to have been there. And I think something just real quick, what you said about fear and faith both require us to believe in something we cannot see. Fear and faith both require us to believe in something that we cannot see, right? So why do we give power to fear, right? When at the same time, the polar opposite of fear is faith, right? The polar opposite of fear is faith. Yet both of them have the same prerequisite, right? And I think this is something that, you know, I think I feel very moved about this, very passionate about this, because until we actually begin to fundamentally examine our mind, right? And I think I heard this on your interview of Monk Coleman, which I thought was phenomenal, about how this self-examination, this self-reflection process needs to start now, today, right? We actually don't know how long this pandemic is going to last.
Right.
It could last another 2 or 3 years. It could last till tomorrow. We don't know. But the fundamental patterns, right, of our way of being need to be examined, right? And one of the biggest weaknesses, and I don't like using the word weakness, but this is a weakness, is the habit of leaving our minds exposed to negative thoughts.
Ooh.
A human being's biggest weakness is the habit of leaving our minds exposed to negative thoughts. And as somebody who has spent over 20 plus years examining my own mind and seeing how much BS was put in there, not my own choice, that was because I was unaware, right? I was unaware. And then guess what? I was indifferent, right? So first I was ignorant. Then I was like, oh, I don't care about that. Everyone talks about positive thoughts and you're like taking care of yourself. I don't care. That's being indifferent, right? Then I started moving into, oh shit, like I actually need to take care of my mind, because if I'm not taking care of it, someone else is going to put their thoughts in there, positive or negative. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Dr. Tahir, he says, excellent speaker, very clear with his thoughts. And Dr. Tanir actually is a plant-based eater, vegan, and he's in his 70s, and he went plant-based after he had open heart surgery. He's a doctor, and it took him having open heart surgery for him to turn his life around. Since that time, he's run marathons. He's been at a triathlon. He's climbed some of the highest mountains in the world. He's traveled around the world. I mean, phenomenal man. And Sky Renfro, I wish you would have stuck around. Sky and I go way back, about 35, 40 years. And good to see you on the live stream. And too bad that you couldn't stick around because he said he couldn't stick around. But, it's so exciting because every day we have the opportunity to either give into fear or give into faith. And what are some of the strategies that people can implement? Like, I know for myself, this morning I got up about just before 5 o'clock, started with yoga. And when I start my day with about a half hour worth of yoga, I have a better day. I also do my wrist exercises because it's only been a couple of months and I had a plate put in my wrist, and I have to do these exercises to get that flexibility. And I was thinking about this as I was doing the exercise, and it's not an unpainful process. Let's put it that way. It's like I could say, okay, it hurts too much. I don't want to do it. Well, over the long haul, I'm going to do myself a disservice by not enduring the pain right now. And so going through that discomfort, and it's not like excruciating pain, but it's discomfort. So I do that. Then I do a meditation. Then I go on a run. That's how I start my day. And when I start my day like that, it works out great. No matter what happens, I'm going to be able to deal with it. If I get up and I immediately turn on the news, I'm going to have a crappy day. There's no two ways about it. So what is your protocol and how do you work with your clients? And actually, how do people find you? Let's start with that. What's your web address?
Sure. So website would be veganfitnessredefined.com.
Okay. Veganfitnessredefined.com. Okay. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So what is a protocol that you would give a client if they said, oh, my days just aren't working out. I can't resist the temptations. Life sucks and I'm living in all this fear. How do you help them?
One of the core priorities, so actually the first core priority that we teach is a positive mind. And there's actually a specific a strategy that we can actually talk about real quick right now.
You bet.
Which is it's called GMV. And basically that stands for gratitude, meditation, and visualization. So this is the trifecta of meta habits that if you have in place every single day, you cannot help but actually improve the level of positivity, the level of internal growth that's actually required for us actually to grow as human beings. But it's easier said than done. So what we like to focus on first is actually making this as simple as possible, right? So simple that you can't help but win. And a simple way to do this is just to do 1 minute per habit, 1 minute per habit. So it'd be 1, 2, 3 minutes, right? And it allows you to build up momentum, right? Because especially in the beginning of habit development, especially if this is something that you're kind of like new with, or you've been struggling with, or you've been kind of like up and down with, right? If we really want to set up what we call winning streaks, right? Winning streaks, which is when you have a series of wins of the same habit over a period of time. So instead of doing it for like one day and then going off, and quitting after 2 weeks, you start to do it 3 days. I got 3 days in a row. Amazing.
Right.
5 days in a row. Amazing. The winning streak is going to end. But the question is, how can we increase the length of the winning streak each time and time over again? Another philosophy in tandem with this is that our best weeks always come after our worst. Our best weeks always come after our worst, because it's very easy to think, I just got a 14-day winning streak. This is going great. But then what happens when the car breaks down or somebody gets sick in the family? And then you have to be in the hospital, you have to be at the mechanic. I mean, I know I have to be at the mechanic tomorrow, and this is kind of like annoying for me, right? And I'm already feeling like this stress, this frustration. I'm like, oh my God, we just fixed the engine and the radio. Now we got to fix the wheel bearings. Like, this is annoying for me. But then I come back to my internal state and I think, no, external situations cannot affect me. Actually, there is nothing outside that can affect me, because everything outside is empty and meaningless until I give it meaning, until I put emotion into it, right? Marcus Aurelius has this great quote. He said, everything out there, it doesn't have any meaning. It's actually meaningless until you start to input your emotion, until you put your perception on it, right? So what you and I may see as, you and I may see the same thing in two different ways, because I may just see it as complete neutral, and you may see it as like, wow, this is amazing. Or I may see this complete negative, right? And it's really this perception. It's our projection, right? So going back to the habits. So the GMB, actually, one of the reasons why it's so powerful is because gratitude is one of the most powerful vibrations we can put ourselves in as a human being. In fact, fear, hopelessness, despair, all these things, they cannot exist in your body when you're in a state of gratitude.
Right.
But there's a difference between just saying, because I think a lot of people, they talk about this, right? Yeah, this is everything I'm saying here is not fundamentally new, but what I'm trying to hit on here is saying it in a different way that you may hear it in a new way. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you've already been practicing gratitude or affirmations, this is great. I commend you. I acknowledge you. Right. Most people aren't doing this. But what I will say, if you've noticed you haven't been seeing actual tangible results, you haven't actually been feeling a difference, it's because you haven't emotionalized it. Right. And the key here is to emotionalize your thoughts, emotionalize your words. Right. Our subconscious mind is where our emotional body resides, not in our conscious mind. Right. There's a famous criminologist. She was investigating how, when people, they're in contact with crime, they're like, oh my God, crime, this is so terrible. Get it away from me. Right. And then over time, this same criminologist was examining, these people, they started to become normal with crime. They're like, oh my God, in our neighborhood, this crime, it's so terrible, but it's just, it's just the way it is. Right. That's how it is. It starts to normalize. Right. Over time, this same criminologist found that these same people actually started to become criminals. They actually started to become like that which that they despised because of the impact, right? The same exact thing happens with your subconscious mind. When you start with gratitude affirmations, your mind is going to be like, oh, hell no, there's no way I can be happy, healthy, wealthy, fulfilled. Your mind will be the same exact way. It will reject it. Keep going. You need to keep going. After time, it's going to start to normalize. You're going to be like, maybe I can be a happy, healthy, fit, strong vegan leader. Maybe it is possible. Over time, it starts to sink in. You're like, of course, right? Our subconscious will believe anything real or imaginary. That's the brilliance of it.
And it's so interesting because there are those points where, we study this material. I've been studying this kind of material for, I'm going on about 45 years now, maybe even longer. And I was about 19 or 20 when I first tapped into this information and moving into, I was just thinking about this morning. I'm on the other side of 67, moving to this side of 68. And it's like, wow, how did that happen? But something I heard actually early on in recovery was a grateful heart cannot be a hateful heart, because a lot of people that go into 12-step programs or they want to make a change in their life, they have a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of hate. And that's one of the reasons that they continue certain behaviors that are very self-destructive. And one of the first lessons I was taught is if you can express things to be grateful for, then you won't be hateful. And I remember the first time that one of my sponsors said, I want you to list what you're grateful for. And I said, I have nothing to be grateful for. And she goes, well, you're pretty selfish to, you've got your arms, your legs, your eyes, you didn't kill anybody. You didn't end up dead. You didn't end up in a ditch, a few things to be grateful for. And she said, do you have a roof over your head? I said, yeah, but it's a small place. She goes, but is it a roof over your head? And she goes, do you have a bed to sleep in? Yeah, but it's an old bed. Do you have a refrigerator? Well, yeah, but it's an old refrigerator. And she kept at it until I really got that it's the simple things that you start with and you build that foundation. So, I'm really glad that you brought up about gratitude, because so often we look at a practice that we have and we think we should get an instant result, instead of looking at it and saying, look at all the years it took me to get where I'm at. It's not going to change overnight necessarily. Some things do change overnight. Other things, it takes a while. So, Gabriel, I'm really, really thrilled that we had this time. And, it's so interesting that we're doing a live, because usually I record these and you said, oh, let's do a live. And it's like, okay, I'm game, But what are your closing thoughts for people? And I want to remind people to go to veganfitnessredefined.com. That's veganfitnessredefined.com. And you can see Gabriel's before and after picture, as well as dozens of other pictures of people before and after the coaching that you give them. But in closing, what are your final thoughts for people to really live a life with passion, excitement, with, the juice of life?
I think, this is fundamentally going to come back to what your motivation is. And I know we touched on this on the beginning, and I know that this is broadcasted, very, very mainstream, like, just connect to your why and things will be perfect. They won't be perfect, right? But I guarantee you this, if you take the time to examine, to really look deep in your heart, right? Because this is where it has to come from. It can't come from just this mental here. Many of us, we're living up here. We're living in our minds, right? But as vegans, we actually know if we're truly moved by compassion, that's over here, right? This happens in the heart space. So I think that one of the biggest things that I've learned in my own fitness journey, my own personal development journey, is just really coming back to my why. Like, why am I actually doing this? Am I doing this because I want to build up my ego, because I want to build up a great reputation? Or am I doing this because I actually want to leave a great legacy, because I want others to see a great example, not for me, but because they need it, right? I come from a big Hispanic family, very big Latino. So a lot of cousins. I'm the oldest of 6. And I've realized that's something that over the years, I think that I either unconsciously and then later on, I actually intentionally diminished myself. I actually put myself down and kind of like shrunk myself, right? I'm not a tall guy, I'm not like super like big or anything like that. But like, if possible, I made myself even smaller. And I think the reason, reflecting on that, was because of the pressure, right? Because unconsciously, I realized like, wow, actually, there's people in my family who actually look up to me, whether they know it or not. And now moving on, moving into my coaching practice and communities now, I think I've realized that it's not about this, like, this position of authority, right? This position of like, oh, just because I'm a coach or because I'm in this position, you should listen. No, it should actually come because you're being this example, you're being this embodiment, right? And then people will naturally follow you. They'll actually be like, wow, like this guy is not just trying to, get me to do something for his own agenda. It's actually coming from this place of like, we actually need more people to do this. We actually need more people to become this, if that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting because my niece, she's a niece-in-law, and she has a very strong position on choice around the vaccine. And I'm not going to get into the pros and cons on that, or the anti or pro. I just will say that she has a very strong position, and she put up a TikTok video that got incredible traction. It got like 45,000 likes. And it was one of her first videos. And I said, oh my gosh, I said, you have a voice that people want to hear. Regardless of whether I agree with her or not, that's not the point. The point is that she has a voice that people want to hear. And I said, you did really good on your video. She goes, yeah, but I'm not, real comfortable on camera. I said, do the people that need to hear your message a favor and put your message out there. Every day she's been going on TikTok. She now has a huge, and this is like within the last 2 weeks, she has a huge following, and she she has a very controversial position. I will say that. But I have so much respect for her for having the courage to put her message out there in spite of the fact that she was afraid to be on camera. And now she's crushing it. I mean, in 2 weeks, I have just seen phenomenal change in her. And I love the fact that she's honoring her message. And I know that as vegans, oftentimes we get criticized. You know, we put something up on, let's say, Twitter about not consuming dairy. I did a phenomenal article recently, and a really well-researched article on, you know, how the dairy industry is subsidized by the government. And if it wasn't subsidized, people couldn't afford milk, and what it does to the cows and the calves. And, you know, I went into a lot of research and what it does for our health. And I'll tell you, every time I post something like that, I do get criticized, but I can't let that criticism stop me from living my purpose and my life's work. And it sounds like you're of the same belief that no matter what people are going to say, because the bigger we get out there with our message, the more we're going to get judged. That's a fact of life. And what do you say to the people who really do have an important message to share? Because we all do have a message to share. What do you say to the ones that make themselves small because they're afraid of being judged?
You know, I think it's going to come back to you starting with yourself. I think that if you truly believe you have something meaningful, worthwhile to share with others, with us, you know, with everybody who's listening, I think that it's really going to come back to, you know, looking at yourself in the mirror and starting there, like really just starting there. And I know it kind of sounds like simple, like, you know, like there's nothing fancy about it. There really isn't. And I think this is something that's very like common. You're like, oh, you need to do like this amazing, like intense, like protocol. No, it really comes down to just sit down, breathe, right? Acknowledge your life. You are alive. You are a living being, right? You have so much worth, so much value, so much to give. And I think this is something that, you know, from my own personal experience, it's easy. It's very easy to fall into these habits of thinking because it's a habit. It's a habit of thinking. It's a way of self-doubt, of self-criticism, right? But if we can start to rewire that, right? And it comes with that decision, right? It's something that you mentioned. You're really making that decision. I will never drink again. I am not a drinker. This is not who I am, right? It comes with that decision. I decide to be somebody confident. It really comes like that. It's not going to change overnight, but the decision happens like this. It does happen like that. That is instantaneous. Once you make a decision, I heard somebody, this was on another mastermind or mentorship. I was on a coaching call and I heard the mentor there. He was speaking about, I believe, his father-in-law, right? He was speaking about his father-in-law, about how I think that he went to the doctor and the doctor said, you know, if you keep smoking, this guy had been smoking like 20 years, right? A pack a day, right? So if you keep smoking, like you're not going to live, another year, you're not going to see your kids grow up, et cetera, et cetera. This guy, and I thought this was so incredible. He literally quit like that. He said, I will never smoke again. I will never smoke again. And I think that's something that, you know, we can talk all day about strategies and tactics and all these amazing, like long-term transformation process. This is good, right? This is important. But I think something that as human beings, we actually forget is that we actually have the potential to literally make a life-changing decision like that. Like literally, like I am never smoking again. I'm never drinking. I am choosing to be somebody confident from this day forward, right? I value my life. And then from there on, you start to prove it to yourself. That's what the habits is. It's just proof. It's evidence, right? The reason why we actually keep the habits of self-doubt and self-criticism alive is because we show ourselves the evidence every day, right? We show ourselves, oh, I'm being small here, or I'm not being brave here, or I'm not doing. That's evidence. You're showing yourself the results. The proof is in the pudding. So show yourself a different one. Show yourself a new result, because then you have to move in alignment with that new result.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Gabriel, this has been delightful. I encourage people, again, go to veganfitnessredefined.com and you'll be able to access a lot of great information. And if you want to reach out to Gabriel about coaching, he's there for you. And this is Kathleen Gage with the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. We went live on Facebook, and this is also going to be on all the platforms for audio podcasts and YouTube. Thank you so much for listening in, and you have a great day. And Gabriel, thank you so much. Be blessed.
Thank you, Kathleen. Take care.
Thank you for your commitment to an ethical life through plant-based food choices. The kind of choices that are kind to your body, the environment, and most of all, animals. Be sure to leave a review and rating of the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show.